Okay, so this was the first session that we did down in Uyo at the Ibom Hotel. We have on the left-hand side a set of performance scores for a set of deliverables, ministerial deliverables, and we also have the outputs. So these are the main outputs for each deliverable. What we want to do is we want to automatically populate our tables here on the right hand side based on the score, and we have our performance assessment, our red, amber and green criteria, green being 70% and above, amber being 50 to 70%, and red being less than 50%, and we'll talk a little bit more about these ranges as we go through the process. Each of these deliverables belongs to, first of all, a ministry. So here we've got Federal Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Planning, and also they belong to a priority area and also a driver. So we have our 9 priority areas here in this table, so obviously we want to be capturing in this table based on this column here and the ministry table here. So obviously in this example again we've got FMF, BNP, agriculture and education. So we want to capture all of the agriculture in this row, all of the education in this row, and all of the finance, budget and national planning in this row. If you remember, another key very important thing, we have here 2 blank performance cells. If you remember, I was saying down in Uyo the difference between a blank cell and a cell containing a 0 is very important to distinguish between those two. A blank cell means that the data is not available. If we put a 0 in here, it would mean that the number of MDAs captured in IPPIS is none, but that is not the case. We don't know how many MDAs are captured in IPPIS. This is just an example. This data is just dummy data, so I'm not saying that there are no MDAs captured in IPPIS. This is just dummy data, so don't worry too much. But just to distinguish between an empty cell being no data is available and a cell containing a 0 means that in this example, as I said, no MDAs are captured in IPPIS. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be writing some formula and putting it into these columns here, which will then help us to populate this table and this table automatically. So the first thing I want to do, if you notice here in this column here, our priority areas are called PA1, PA2, PA3 and so on. In this column here, what we have is the priority area number and the driver letter, so 1A relates to priority area 1, driver A. What I want to do in this column here first is I want to turn this into this format here. So for this I want it to say PA1. For this also will be PA1. This would be PA2. So let's title this column PA for the priority area. And the first formula we're going to use is the mid formula. So we can capture the 1 but not capture the A. And we also want to put PA ahead of the 1 so that it matches this format here. So the formula we're going to put in here is equals to quotation PA close quotation. And this means that we will automatically get this static text in this cell. Now to add in a second element of text, we're going to use the epsilon or and then click on where we want to pick the text from. Now we only want the 1, we don't want 1A. So in order just to pick up the first digit in this cell here, we're going to use the formula mid. Mid, open bracket, and for the mid formula, first of all, we need to identify the source of the text, which is this cell here, D2. Then the next criteria is where do we start? If we're picking up text from cell D2, where do we start? we're going to start with the first digit. So we say 1 being the first digit. And then how many digits do we want? That's the last criteria. We just want the first digit. So we start with digit 1, and in total we just want 1 digit. So that is the formula. If in this formula we put 2 here, just to show you what the formula does, this will also pick up the A, because we'd be picking up our source, D2, from the first digit and pick up 2 digits. So that gives us PA1A. But we don't want that, we only want the first digit, so we go back to having just 1. Okay, so that's the first element, so we can drag that formula all the way down, and we can see that it's just picking up the first digit and putting in the PA. Next step, we need to identify which of these deliverables are performing at 70% and above. So I'm just going to put in the header of this column 70% plus. Now, this is quite important, again, when we define our ranges. When we say 70% plus, it means that if the performance is 70% exactly or above, then we're going to capture it in this cell here. Now, we have to use the greater than or equal to formula in order to identify 70% and above. So that's very important. And what we want to do here, we're going to assign different scores, and let's just go in and fill these in to be our ranges. So 50 to 70%. What this is actually saying is if it is exactly equal to 50, then it will be captured. If it's exactly equal to 70, it won't be, because this is less than 70, if you like. So this is between exactly 50 and anything up to but less than 70%. The final column is less than 50%. So if it's 50% exactly, it's going to be captured here. If it's anything lower than 50%, it will be captured here. Less than 50%. And then we have our final one, which is unrated, which is where we don't have a percentage. And what we're going to do is we're going to arbitrarily assign a score of 4 if the performance is 70% and above. We're going to assign a score of 3 if it is 50 to 70. We're going to score 2 if it's less than 50%. And if it's unrated, we're going to score it as a 1. These are just arbitrary numbers to help us to identify in here what range the deliverable is in. Okay, so let's come into here. In fact, actually, we need to put another column in. Let's actually just put in here. Let's drag these across. Okay, so we're actually going to, before we assign it to one of these columns, we're actually going to do the performance rating. So in here, this is where we're going to put our 4, 3, 2, or 1. So this is the performance rating. Let me just write that text. I'm trying to keep everything in view, so let's just make that a bit smaller. Okay, so now what we want to do, we want to assign a digit in here depending on the performance. So as I said, if this is 70% or above, it's going to be a 4. If it's between 50 and 70, it's going to be a 3. If it's less than 50, it's going to be a 2. And if it's unrated, it's going to be a 1. So let's write the formula in here first. And this is going to be quite a long formula. It has to be long because we've got to capture all of the different scores. So okay, I'm going to do this a different way actually. I'm going to do this a more simple way. What we're going to do is we're going to capture this by picking up what we have in these cells here. So if it's 70% and above, if this score is 70% and above, we want to put a 4 in this cell here. If it's between 50 and 70, we want to put a 3. if it's less than 50, a 2 if it's unrated, a 1. So let's start with our 70% and above. So we say equals if this is greater than or equal to, and this is the greater than or equal, you put greater than and then equal. So if this is greater than or equal to 0.7, that being the decimal equivalent of 70%, then we want to return a 4, because that is the score we're assigning to performance above 70%. If it's not, then we're going to just have a blank cell, which is the open quotation, close quotation. So this is our standard if formula. If this cell here, E2, is greater than or equal to 0.7 or 70%, put in this cell 4. If not, the double quotation marks is a blank cell. Okay, and we see now because this is above 70%, then we get our score of 4. Now then, here we have to have what we call an embedded if, because we want to capture everything that is 50% and above, but is less than 70%. So in this cell, we say equals if the value in cell E2 is greater than or equal to 0.5. And this is where we have our embedded if. If it's also less than 70%, then we're going to assign a score of 3. In this, if it is greater than 50% or equal to 50%, but it is also greater than 70%, that is the if false, then we want a blank cell. And again, this now comes back to the first condition. If it is not meeting this condition, if it's not above 50%, then we have our blank cell again, which is our double quotation mark. So that is the formula here, which will assign a score of 3 if this performance is greater than or equal to 50%, but less than 70%. Okay, and it's a blank cell, which it should be. Now we're going to assign if it is less than 50%, but what we also have to identify in this column is it's not blank, because if it's blank, then it's not less than 50%, it's unrated. So again, we need a double if formula here. So we start by saying if, open bracket, this cell is less than 0.5 or 50%. If this cell is blank, then we don't want to return a score of 2, so we have our double quotation mark. But if it isn't blank, then we assign a score of 2. And then obviously this is now the first, coming back to the first condition. If the first condition is not met, so if it's not less than 50%, then again we want a blank cell, so we have a double quotation mark. Okay, last one. So if this is unrated, which means it has a blank cell, then we want to return a score of 1. So equals if, logical test, this cell is blank, then we assign a score of 1. If not, we return a blank cell. Okay, so now hopefully if we drop this down, copy this down all the way, we can see all of our scores. So again, we can see 28.85, this is less than 50%, blank cell, so on and so on. Now to get our performance ratings, all we want to do in here is capture the performance score, whichever is the performance score. And again, this is one of the reasons for doing this as a numerical. All I need to do in here is say equals sum. So I'm going to add up all of these scores, and that makes it quite easy. So we just have that formula will effectively just pick up the score. Drag that down, and now we have the score for each indicator. So these columns here are just helping us to populate this here. There are other ways you could do this. You could effectively write all of these formulas in one cell in here rather than having 4 columns, but that makes it slightly complicated. So this is just an easier way to show how to do it. So now what we want to do is we want to populate this table with this data here. So effectively what we're doing is we are identifying all of the PA1, priority area 1, deliverables that have a score of 4 in this column, score of 3 in this column, score of 2 in this column, and a score of 1 in this column. So in here we're going to use the count if formula just to make this easy on ourselves in terms of being able to copy and paste the formula once it's written. I'm actually going to go up here and I'm going to just put in the numerical scoring indicator that we put in here. So 70% and above we've assigned a score of 4, 50 to 70% we've assigned a score of 3, less than 50% is a 2, and this unrated is a 1. This is just going to make the formulas in here more consistent. So what we're going to be using here is the count if, and we're going to use count ifs because it's slightly easier and slightly more intuitive. So the formula in here will be count ifs, open bracket. So first of all, we want to count only if the indicator, the deliverable, is related to priority area 1. So the first criteria range is the priority area. So this range here. And the criteria is that it is priority area 1. So we see here the blue is the criteria range, so this is where we're looking to see whether the criteria is being met, and this here is the criteria. Now we go to our second criteria. So the criteria range is here, and in order to count in this column here, it needs to be a score of 4. So we're just going to put our criteria as being this. And that is the basic formula. I'm going to close the bracket because that is the basic formula. In order to be able to copy this formula across these 4 columns and down through the 9 priority areas, we need to anchor some of these cell references. So when we copy this formula across, if we don't anchor, then everything in column F will turn into G, everything in column M will turn into N, and so on. So where we want our column to stay the same, we need to anchor our column. Similarly, if we want to have the same row, so when we're identifying this score of 4, we need this row to stay the same. So we use the dollar symbol to anchor our columns and our rows. So we want to anchor the F and the 2 because we want this to stay exactly the same, and obviously the F and the 28. For the M, we want to anchor the column reference but not the row. We want the row to change as we go down, but we do want to anchor the M. The second criteria range, again, we need to anchor everything. And finally, for the score, which is N1, we want it to remain in row 1 all the time, but we want the N to change to O, etc. So we're going to anchor the 1. This is now our formula. Everything is anchored. Sorry, that is anchored slightly in the wrong place. There we are. And now what we can do is we can drag this down and we can drag this across. So this now is showing us how many PA1 deliverables are above 70% and so on and so on. Just to check that we've captured everything, what you can see here, very down the bottom, just down the bottom here, you can see sum is 27. So the total of all of these cells, the total number of indicators being counted is 27. And we can see here we have 28 rows less our header row. So we have 27 deliverables. So all of them are being captured. Okay, now we're going to do a similar thing but for the ministry rather than the priority area. So the formula here is going to be pretty much exactly the same as this, except that rather than looking here, we're going to look here. And there's actually quite an easy way to do this, rather than having to retype the formula. If I copy that formula and bring it down here, and let's go into our formula, what we can do is we can actually just pick up, rather than looking at this, we can actually just pick this up. So hover over it where you can see the crossroad arrows, if you like. Just hold your left cursor down on your mouse and just drag this across. And it's now, if you see the formula has changed, it's now looking at column A rather than column F. So let's click enter. And again, now we can drag and we can drag, and there we have it. So we're now populated. Again, just looking to check, are we capturing all 27 deliverables? Yes, because the sum down here in this bottom little thing here is saying 27. So we can establish that all 27 deliverables are being captured. So this is how we populate our priority area table and our ministry table to count the number of ministerial deliverables in each scoring range.